The title of my presentation is Collective Crime and Collective Moral Responsibility. The origins of my interest in crime and responsibility are non-academic. Initially it was, and it still is, all about emotions: sadness, mourning, shame, embarrassment, hopelessness. Why such emotions? I'm an ethnic Serbian, that is, I'm a member of a social group in whose name the grave crimes were committed in the recent past. Some of my co-nationals thought and acted on the assumption that I would be better off if those children, women and men whom I never met would not live on earth anymore. And so they were killed. Had it not been for a certain interpretation of my good as a member of the Serbian nation, they would still be alive. And this is the core fact. Now, diverse scholarly disciplines, law, history, sociology, religious studies, political science, psychology, anthropology, help us reveal layers of complexity of mass atrocities. But let me argue that ultimately one particular set of facts and one evaluative stance are beyond dispute. First, at the level of facts, all such crimes present clear instances of killing and harming vast numbers of innocent people. Second, at the level of evaluation, these practices were wrong and none of them can ever be justified. No historical, cultural, ideological, or political argument advanced to explain crime can be accepted as relevant towards its defense. To kill, torture, humiliate, or otherwise harm innocent persons is objectively wrong, full stop. Elsewhere, I detailed my understanding of the Serbian criminal practice in Bosnia. To summarize, I identified Serbia under Milosevic as a populist criminal regime and its misdeeds as collective crime. The populist criminal regime is a regime type that engages in mass atrocities while relying on the support of its subjects, or more precisely on the support of those subjects who belong to the group in whose name the regime rules. The essential quality of this relationship is not repression, but rather populist integration, which includes a high level of ideological and practical agreement about crime. Such crimes can be named collective crimes. A regime-sponsored atrocity becomes a collective crime provided certain conditions exist. First, crime unfolds as a coordinated intentional action of a multitude of individuals, organizations, and groups. Second, crime is ideologically justified by reference to the group-specific interest. Those who join for the criminal purpose, who formulate and spread criminal intention, and who engage in criminal acts will justify each step by invoking the identity of the whole group and some alleged good of all of its members. The targeted group is presented in the same perverted ethical terms as the embodiment of everything that is wrong. The circle is closed by inferring the destruction of the enemy group is both necessary and good. The third condition for collective crime is that it should be ideologically, legally, and politically normalized, meaning that the system of values, political arrangements, and legal norms are shaped in ways that allow, justify, and render routine the crime. Fourth, a significant number of the subjects support the regime, its ideology, and its actions, including killing. Collective crime can then be defined as an act committed by a significant number of members of a group, in the name of all members of that group, with the support of the majority of group members, and against individuals targeted on the basis of their belonging to a different group. Applied to the Serbian case, the summary reads as follows. Grave injustices have been done recently, which can be identified as the crimes committed by some Serbs in the name of all Serbs and against the non-Serbian population. I won't be going into details of this concept. My focus is on the consequences of the crime and especially on the status of the perpetrator's community and all its members. Now, legacies of collective crime confront the post-criminal society with difficult questions. How should we live after such events? What should we think and how shall we feel about what happened? What should we do? Do we owe some special duties to the victims and their community? Answers to these and related questions should depart, I believe, from several related claims. First, post-criminal society, its political regime, and all its citizens are duty-bound to explicitly acknowledge the criminal past. In a minute, I will try to explain what acknowledgement exactly means. Second, responsibility for crime is legal and political, but it is also moral. And let me please focus on moral responsibility. The nature of the evil past requires that in thinking of moral responsibility, we go beyond the first person singular. It concerns individuals as group members. Further, this responsibility is not reducible to causally identifiable group of perpetrators, collaborators, and bystanders. We all need to ask what happened in our group, or what transformation our identity underwent in the recent past, making killing on our behalf possible. So here is the core claim about moral responsibility. Each member of the non-voluntary group, in the name of which the collective crime was committed, is morally accountable, regardless of whether he or she contributed to criminal action and its consequences, regardless of his or her attitude to that action, and regardless of whether he or she was able to influence that action. If this holds good, collective moral responsibility could be understood as the duty of all members of the group to take a moral stance towards the crime that was committed in their name. What moral accountability and taking the stance exactly mean will depend on where the person stood during the atrocities. Distinction among those who are in different ways blameworthy on the one hand and decent group members on the other hand remains relevant. We are not equally responsible, but nobody is free from the sinister past. I am responsible to acknowledge the wrongful character of actions taken in the name of the group to which I belong. It implies accepting that I cannot be legitimately disassociated from the crime, regardless of my past and present attitudes to it. I also accept that the crime cannot be legitimately seen as a past that has passed. It remains significant. This presence of the past defines moral position of each group member by posing at least three broad requirements. First, we should address the community of victims to publicly admit their suffering, tell them that what happened was wrong and unjustifiable and that we are sorry. Second, we address the human community. If we want to be granted one more chance to return to the civilized human community, we should try to demonstrate, as individuals, society, and polity, that we deserve this chance. Third, we look at ourselves. This means reflecting on recent wrongs, learning from our moral fall, and finding in these lessons the guidelines for reshaping relationships within our group. It is important to see that collective crime has created new crime-specific identities. In other words, crime creates new groups, changes all their members' moral properties, positions, and relationships. Most importantly, we distinguish between members of the victimized group and the members of the perpetrators group. Before the crime, we were all moral equals. During the crime, moral equality of all members of the victimized group was denied in the cruelest possible way on behalf of the new moral position of all members of the perpetrators group. After the crime, we find the members of these two groups positioned by the legacies of what they had to endure, what they did, or what they did not do. We need to proceed by asking about the relationship among members of those two groups. I want to argue that this is the relationship of inequality. In its core should be harm-specific entitlements and duties. The principle of legal and moral equality that was suspended in the most terrible way by the crime remains suspended in transition. But inequality now acquires a different meaning. It first informs that victims and their community have a special entitlement. In addition to the rights to justice, truth, and compensation, they have the right to demand a proper reaction from those associated with the criminal agency. On the other hand, the perpetrators and members of their group do not have any entitlement or right to demand or expect anything from victims. From the viewpoint of members of the perpetrators group, the concepts of forgiveness and reconciliation remain highly suspect. Our moral position is shaped by the harm-specific duties. Appropriate responses are required from each of us. What an appropriate response is will depend on one's relation to the crime, whether one did wrong or not. But the core claim is that the crime has compromised each member's moral integrity. The core question then reads how to make sense of my responsibility in terms of attitudes, feelings, intentions, and actions required. Thinking of human suffering is important. Sometimes we find ourselves connected to especially disturbing past misdeeds, which caused enormous suffering to a great number of people. Sometimes the victims belong to our group or society. Sometimes they are killed or made to suffer because they do not belong to our group or society. If I fail to reflect on human suffering to which I am connected, I fail in my very basic human duty. If crime and suffering point to me, the realm of my autonomy becomes shaped by that what happened. Choosing the right course of action, right course of living, comes down to taking the right stance on the wrongdoing. I am autonomous and I am free only to the extent I live up to my duty to look back. To argue otherwise, or to pretend that one can live simply by looking forward, by focusing on the present and future, comes down to denying humanity of victims as well as my own humanity. Let me focus on two related duties, duty to acknowledge the wrongdoing and the duty to remember. Acknowledgement is a process of responding to the crime, whereby we publicly express and recognize our knowledge of the fact that killing and other forms of the most brutal harming of innocent people happened, and that these atrocities were carried out in our name. This acknowledgement of the fact should be accompanied by a normative acknowledgement, which should explicate the following statements. The crime was wrong. It should not have happened. No argument can be advanced to justify it. It must not be denied. We have to find an appropriate response to it. The principal addressees of this response should be the victims and their community. Further, acknowledging means recognizing the way in which my group identity has changed the world for the worse. In this regard, acknowledging the crime means acting from duty to recreate the moral universe as it should be. Notice that at issue is not to recreate the world as it used to be. It cannot be done, and it would be wrong to think in such terms, because it would send out the message that yesterday's death and suffering can be safely removed from today's world. Besides, the primary goal of acknowledgement is not to amend relationships with victims and their community. I may hope that my right attitudes, feelings, and actions can contribute to improving the human condition of the victims. But crucially, even if I could help anybody, and I strongly believe that I cannot help not a single person, even if I could help anybody, even if I cannot help, anybody, I still ought to fulfill my obligation to respond to wrongdoing. I see memory as the most important expression of acknowledgement. Memory is a particular type of knowledge that preserves and re-evaluates the past and that centers on the integration of thus mediated past into the present. We can distinguish among three types of the communities of memory after crime. Those who belong to the community of the victims have the right to remember, accompanied by the right to demand that others remember. Those who belong to the human commonwealth are duty-bound to remember what happened to the innocent human beings, because the victims were as human as they are. My focus remains on the third community. Why and how shall we, in the land of perpetrators, remember the atrocities committed in our name? A look into any post-conflict society reveals that individuals, groups, and communities disagree bitterly on both facts and their interpretation. We often see them working hard on revising their histories. Forgetting and different forms of denial are everywhere. But we will also typically see that it is not victims who forget. Victims don't want to forget, and even if victims wanted to forget, they could not. It is impossible for victims to forget. Closing the books, denial, letting the bygones be bygones are privileges of wrongdoers and members of their groups. We can sometimes understand why they do so, but such attitudes and practices are never justified. We have a choice. The right choice is the only one, to acknowledge the misdeeds and to remember them as shameful acts. In identity terms, we are what we make of our shameful past. We are morally obligated to do justice to a fact that is both simple and morally ultimate, and the fact is the absence of the persons who are killed, and who would have been present had they not been denied the right to live. The fact that these persons are absent or dead cannot lead to the conclusion that the lives they used to live are irrelevant today. So those people whose pictures we see, whom we see today as skeletons or parts of skeletons, they did not deserve to be killed. Still, they are dead, which means that they suffered the gravest possible injustice, in the face of which my community chose to keep the dominant discourse of moral indifference. This crime, this wrong, cannot be righted. The persons whose lives should have been respected as sacrosanct because they were human beings, they are dead. They are dead because of a certain ethical interpretation of our collective identity and of my individual identity. There is nothing about this fact that we could ever heal, amend, or help overcoming, nothing to be restored or repaired. We cannot change this moral landscape after the fact. Our lives are morally impaired, and it will remain so. This holds good for morally decent Serbs as well. If I did not intend, contribute to, or support the practice of wrongdoing, my moral burden is neither individual guilt nor moral blame, because this can be inferred only from one's intentions, attitudes, and actions. Still, I suffer moral loss, since the crime in a particular way ties my identity both with my fellow members' identity and with the identity of victims. The former killed the latter in my name, and this makes me morally tainted. Although I have not done it, although I oppose this practice, it still points to who I am. To conclude, our lives are morally shaped by this absence to which we are connected. We have to look for the answers to the question what it means to live as a human being, tainted by the violent death of other innocent human beings. Our duty of memory then transpires as the duty of bearing witness to the absence of the victims. Thank you very much.